This is Overheard Nation, where America's forgotten secrets come to light. Ready to uncover the truth?
The ship that killed more people than the Titanic. What if the deadliest shipwreck in American history, a disaster that killed more people than the Titanic, happened not in a frozen ocean, but on a calm, wide river? What if it was all caused by a single greedy decision? And what if the world, in its rush to celebrate, simply forgot to notice? This is the story of the steamboat Sultana. April 1865. The American Civil War was over. The guns had fallen silent. For the first time in 4 long years, the nation was at peace. Celebrations erupted in the streets of the North. The Union was preserved. The nightmare was over. But for thousands of Union soldiers, the war was not yet finished. They were survivors. Survivors of the Confederacy's most brutal prisoner-of-war camps, places like Andersville and Cahaba. They had endured starvation, disease, unspeakable cruelty. They were skeletons of men, haunted by what they had seen. But they were alive, and they only had one dream left: to go home. On the banks of the Mississippi River, near Vicksburg, they waited. Thousands of them, waiting for a ship that would carry them north, back to their families, back to their lives, back to the world they had fought to save. And on the horizon, a ship appeared. A large, beautiful, side-wheel steamboat, 3 decks tall, majestic and powerful. Her name was the Sultana. For these broken soldiers, she was not just a ship. She was salvation, a promise of home, a promise that was about to be broken in the most catastrophic way imaginable. The Sultana was a magnificent vessel, a workhorse of the Mississippi River. Her legal capacity was 376 passengers and crew, but the United States government was desperate to get its men home, and it was paying for speed. $5 for every enlisted man, $10 for every officer, delivered safely back to the North. The Sultana's captain, J. Cass Mason, saw an opportunity, not just to serve his country, but to make a fortune. Just before arriving in Vicksburg to pick up the soldiers, the ship had a problem. One of its 4 massive boilers had sprung a leak. A proper repair would take several days the captain did not want to waste. Other ships were already taking on soldiers, taking his profits. So a hasty, temporary patch was ordered. A sheet of metal was riveted over the bulge in the boiler wall, a dangerous, unstable fix. The chief engineer warned against it. He argued the boiler was unsafe at high pressure. His warnings were ignored. With the faulty boiler hidden from view, the loading began. The official passenger limit was 376. Captain Mason took on more than 2,000 men, 6 times the legal capacity. The soldiers, weak from imprisonment but joyful to be free, crowded every available space. They filled the decks, the cabins, the hallways. The ship's structure groaned under the immense, impossible weight. But they were soldiers, used to hardship, and they didn't care. They were finally going home. The Sultana steamed north, fighting against a powerful spring current on the Mississippi River. The night was dark, the water was cold. Most of the men were asleep, dreaming of home. At 2 o'clock in the morning, just a few miles north of Memphis, the nightmare began. Without warning, the patched boiler gave way. Then a second boiler exploded, and then a third. The explosion was catastrophic. A massive fireball erupted into the night sky. It tore a hole through the center of the ship. The pilot house was obliterated instantly. The giant smokestacks collapsed. One crashed down onto the crowded upper deck, crushing hundreds of sleeping men where they lay. The heart of the ship was now a raging inferno. Men who were not killed by the blast were awakened by fire and scalding steam. The decks, weakened and burning, began to collapse, pitching hundreds more into the dark, swirling, ice-cold river below. Panic, chaos, screams in the darkness. The greatest maritime disaster in American history was underway, and no one on the shore even knew it was happening. The first light of dawn revealed a horrific scene. The Mississippi River was filled with debris and with bodies. Men clung to floating mules, to pieces of the deck, to anything that could float. Many had already succumbed to their burns or to the hypothermia from the ice-cold river. Boats from Memphis finally arrived, pulling dazed and wounded survivors from the water. But they were too few and too late. The final death toll was staggering. An estimated 1,700 people died, more than the Titanic. It remains the single greatest maritime disaster in American history. So why has this tragedy been forgotten? Why is the Sultana not a household name? Because of timing and the noise of other even larger events. The nation was exhausted by 4 years of war. It was celebrating the surrender of the last Confederate armies, and it was deep in mourning. Just 13 days before the Sultana exploded, President Abraham Lincoln had been assassinated. The front pages of every newspaper were filled with the hunt for his killer and the political future of the nation. The story of a tragic shipwreck on a distant river, however horrific, was just a small, sad note in a week of world-changing headlines. The story was buried, not by a conspiracy, but by history itself. There was no grand investigation, no public outcry. The captain of the ship was dead. The officer responsible for overloading the vessel, a quartermaster named Captain Frederick Speed, was charged, but he was later acquitted. He argued he was just following orders. No one ever held accountable. No one. For the survivors, the fight was not over. For decades, they fought for recognition. They held reunions. They built memorials. They tried to keep the memory of their lost comrades alive. But the nation had moved on. The story of the Sultana teaches us a difficult lesson, that tragedy is not just measured in the number of lives lost. Sometimes, the greatest tragedy of all is to be forgotten. And it leaves us with a question. How many other great stories, how many immense sacrifices have been buried under the noise of history, waiting for someone to finally listen?
The world is full of forgotten stories, and even more shocking secrets await you. Subscribe to Overheard Nation,